Thanks so much for sharing your garden with us. And now we're going to be welcoming back to Central Texas Garden an old friend, Mary Irish. Welcome back to the program.
Well, it's my pleasure. Well, thank you for having me again.
One of our favorite authors and an intrepid Austin native who's
Absolutely.
ventured out to the desert Southwest and back again.
That's right. That's right. Came back to South Texas.
Well,
That's right.
Mary, for those who don't know her work, is a prolific author, and she used to be the director of the Desert Botanical Garden in Phoenix, Arizona.
I was the director of public horticulture.
The
real directors would be shocked to hear you say that.
Okay, well, in Arizona, and is now working at the San Antonio Botanical Garden. You have published a slew of books recently, one of which is kind of like a beginner's guide for Texas gardening, which is our big focus. But you also recently published a memoir about your experience as a gardener.
I did. We lived in our garden in Arizona for 20 years, and I wrote what I call the story of that garden.
Okay.
You know, and how all the different pieces and parts came together and interacted over the years. And you know what a long-term garden is like.
Absolutely.
They start out one way, they move another, and then they go here, and then they go there. And in the end, you have a lot of great stories. And that's what it is.
Well, that's great. And every garden has a story, right?
Oh, yes. Or many.
Right. And the toughest stories we hear often are from beginning gardeners.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
and
that's the newest book.
Right,
really.
and for people who've moved to this region from other parts that may be, let's say, a little more gentle.
Yes, and really this is not as rough as where I came from, to be quite honest, but it's quite different than, say, the Midwest, or the Northeast, or someplace like that, or even the Deep South in one place.
Sure, and you know, despite the fact that we've had some beautiful rain this fall, much needed, desperately needed, really, rain in the region, we are stuck in the middle of a historic drought still.
Correct. That's right. And it's evident. It's particularly evident in nature. I mean, when you look around, you drive in the hills or you drive around, get out of the city or something, you really start seeing the effects of it. You start seeing dead trees, hillsides that are half done. Anyone who's lived here for a long time recognizes that some years the wildflowers aren't quite what you thought they could be or had seen in the past. I mean, you can see it really clearly when you go outside of town. But even in your garden, you really notice.
Right.
I mean, absolutely.
Well, and you know, what's happening in Mother Nature is impacting us whether we want it to or not.
Correct.
Watering restrictions
Absolutely.
and just the necessity of being smarter with our resources is calling us to a different way to garden. And so that really is kind of the undercurrent or theme of the book in many ways.
It is for me. And when I took this book on, I sort of told the publisher that this is they know me, and this is my background, this is my interest, and I think this would be useful. That these are hopefully plants within the regions that are most successful. They're plants that take minimal intervention watering, can generally grow with the conditions that are there, and really you only need to, get them well established. And it's not like you can turn them completely loose, but most of them you can.
Right.
Actually, especially the woody plants, woody plants.
So it's really a matter of picking the right site for the plants.
So. Yes.
Though there are ways you can modify the site, right?
Oh, absolutely. You can pay attention to things like exposure. The more sun, especially if it's not really well adapted to the sun, the more water, if you aren't careful.
Right.
In addition to mulch, I'm a massive fan of mulch. Mulch makes a huge difference in how much soil moisture is lost just to evaporation to the air, instead of staying down there where it is to the plants. And something that I brought from Arizona, and that is you water long and deep at long intervals. And that pays off in no matter what you're growing, where you're growing.
Exactly.
It's way better than any kind of little piddling water daily sort of thing,
I don't know if this is true in Arizona, but in Texas, living right along the edge of the escarpment, which millions of people do in both San Antonio, Austin, and parts north, if you head west, you have one soil type, which is a quick draining caliche mixed with a little bit of clay.
Pretty much rock.
And limestone. And then you go east and you have deep, gunky clay.
Those old deep prairie soils. That's right. And those are radically different situations. I mean, you're absolutely right. And there are plants that love each one. And some plants will take either, but I would pay attention to, particularly in the clay, to be honest, because the drainage is so difficult often there that it can kill plants that are very well adapted to the rock and to high drainage, and that really need a kind of a fast draining situation. There are a lot of things you can do to help it. You can
Right.
mitigate it, but
Dump
those soils
truckloads
are
of gravel.
dump truckloads of gravel help. Raised beds, or even just raising the ground a bit.
Right.
Yes, quantities and quantities of gravel is absolutely helpful.
Well, you're talking to somebody who brought in probably about 30 dump truckloads of
I know.
crushed granite over time.
I'm telling you, yeah, exactly. You either fill the pit with granite or you pull it up on the top.
Right.
But that's the biggest challenge in those soils, is that they are very, very poor, and they also stay cold longer. They stay cold, and that can be a real problem with some plants.
Well, and speaking of which, I mean, there are a lot of your favorite plants and mine are woody lilies, things like the agaves and the yuccas and things like that. All those beautiful, beautiful plants, which are better adapted to the West and to the thinner soils. And we get a monsoon like we've had this fall, and you can lose those, right?
You certainly can. They can be sort of overwhelmed, as it were. What they do best is get plenty of water, and it's a fairly long period of time in between. They do not have root systems that allow them to kind of go on and off. If the water's there, they take it up, and they don't know how to quit, and they don't do it well. And so they can be swamped and really taken to the cleaners, as it were. You can lose them in too much rain too fast with poor.
Yeah.
So those are excellent choices to put either in a raised bed, containers even, or raise up the soil. This is where your 30 tons of gravel really, really helps.
Right.
Something like a berm. I've even seen them done the other way around, where the hole is filled with gravel in effect, and then they're put on top of it. I think raising it is a little better. They don't have very deep root systems, as you know. They're very shallow, more wide than deep. And so the berm is a really good idea. Don't put them like under the eave or the place where the little pond always happens at your house, or any of those little things. But you can still, especially vulnerable when it's cold, and that happens.
Right.
They're not growing. They're really not sort of able to overcome it.
They
and
can't
that
shed
can
the
be,
moisture.
They can't shed it. They're not metabolizing much, and so you really can. You need to take some attention if you're in a really rainy area.
Okay. Well, the book is filled with great plants, with an introductory information about them. Let's walk people through some of the picks for both East and West in our region. Let's start with the West. What are some of your favorites there? We have a couple of things that are on our list here. Scarlet buckeye, and that.
Oh yeah, Aesculuspavia. That's actually a local native around San Antonio and West, a little bit here and in the hill country.
Usually around creek beds, right?
It actually is, but in nature that's where you find it. But it does a very good job ornamentally, and it is an unusual, big, nice, woody, small tree that likes either the full sun or the shade. And so that's kind of a nice combination.
Great flowers.
Great flowers, ranging from either absolutely scarlet red through orange and even yellow colored forms. And when you have all those together, there's no telling what you'll get. You get bicolors, you get all kinds of stuff. It's just a charm. It's a big, beautiful, pretty leaf. It's a handsome, handsome plant. It could probably fit in to gardens of many different styles, with a lot of different looks.
I think informal woodlands kind of
very,
settings.
very good there. I think actually even something more formal if you want, because those big leaves are just really crisp and lovely. They really are.
Well, that's scarlet buckeye. Narrowleaf rosewood is another
very
one.
Western.
Yes.
Chisos Mountains, Chihuahuan desert plant.
Right.
Again, a very large woody shrub. But, in South Texas, all the way up to here, it has a lot of cold tolerance. And it can grow here on absolute natural rainfall. It almost did that in Phoenix, Arizona. So you can imagine. It's a very drought tolerant. This is a big evergreen shrub that's wonderful for screening if you need to hide something, and it has big heads of white flowers in the spring. And it's got these nice, long, dark green leaves that are luscious on there. They're
dark
thick.
color. It's a nice color.
It's a beautiful color, and it's a pretty form, and it's thick. So you can really use it that way.
Another plant we wanted to highlight is the Texas persimmon, which I have to admit,
absolutely adore it.
You and me both. This is one of my all-time favorites.
It is one of my all-time favorites. It really is, and this is one of the spectacular plants for Texas. This one has a great deal of cold tolerance. It goes all the way to Dallas with effortlessly, really. But this is the great analog to crepe myrtle for me. I mean, much less water, much more tolerance to heat, much less problems with all kinds of different mildews and bugs and all kinds of things. It isn't as showy It doesn't have the flowers, but it has that spectacular bark. You know, it's got that same
beautiful Japanese
just
architecture.
gorgeous architectural bark. And again, a plant that could fit into a big native garden, a woodland garden, or a very formal oriental styled garden very easily.
And there's so many other plants that we could pull out, but I just want to, again, commend you on an excellent book.
Thank you.
The plant lists are great, and this is really a book for those folks who are just hankering to get started.
That's right.
You know?
It is a beginner's book. It really is.
And
And this is the way to jump into it and jump off.
But what I appreciate is you've picked a lot of plants that are interesting and fun to play with, as opposed to the boring yada 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 plants.
Oh, well, yeah. You know, I'm not a boring yada yada plant kind of gal.
Anyway, well, Mary, always a pleasure visiting with you. Thank you so much for your continued excellent work and getting good word out there about so many important aspects of our gardening, including a lot of our mutual favorite plants, I
Yes,
think.
exactly.
So great to have you on the program.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Okay, and coming up next is our friend Daphne.